All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it may be where you are. We're just gonna get started here in about a minute, but give some time for everybody to join us from the waiting room or anybody who just hasn't uh been able to join in yet. So looks like we are now at 10 a.m. Central. So I think we are probably good to get started here. All right. Again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another webinar today. Our topic is applying PFMEA to ISO 14001 2015, a quality approach to controlling environmental risk.
All right, Maddie, am I taking it away from here?
Let's skip to our next slide and see what we got here. You want to give yourself a little introduction then?
Yeah. For those of you that may have attended one of these before, you probably know me. I do a lot for Plexus. My name is Jeremy Hazel, and I've been in industry. I left after about 15 years. One of the things that I currently do is I work with organizations, let's say, to make some common sense happen, right? And when I say make some common sense happen, when we talk about quality systems, when we talk environmental systems, and when we talk about even safety management systems, right? There's a lot of differentiation in these three things, but there's a lot of commonality too. So, what I do these days is I go into organizations largely and I help them make the complex a little bit cleaner. So, to do this type of webinar today, when we thought about what we could do, I really wanted to highlight the risk-based thinking tools that we currently utilize in the QMS. And I wanted to show you how we could use the same methodologies inside of the environmental management system. So for me, this is one of the areas where different management systems, be it quality, safety, or environmental, begin to blend in with the business system. So for me, being able to take these three things, apply it to business-based processes, and have one set of books, right? This is how we say handle risk, whether it's environmental, whether it's quality, whether it's safety. This leads to an efficiency for organizations that most organizations don't necessarily achieve. So for everybody that's on the call with me today, what you're going to get is a large look, let's say, into how to become more efficient. So we're going to go through and we're going to get to know you a little bit here coming up. But what I really want to highlight is that we're assuming that everybody on this webinar necessarily is technically competent, let's say, in ISO 14001, right? So you know about aspects, you know about impacts, and you have some sort of a system. If we have that foundation, now we can have the conversation about how best to work with these commonalities. So that's kind of what I'm going to do. That's where I am in my career in terms of what I work with. So let's take a look at the agenda. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to just highlight a couple big areas of 14,001, right? What does the standard require? Now, I promise you, I'm not going to go through and I'm not going to reiterate the standard. We're not going to put up a bunch of stuff about the standard. We're going to assume that you already know it, at least to the level that you can identify the big blocks. As an example, Section 6 talks a lot about risks, talks a lot about objectives, right? So you really don't need to know it at that level. We don't need to go into the details around 6.1.2 or any of that. Once we understand some of the terms that we're going to be working with, then what we're going to do is I want to introduce you to PFMEA, but I want to show you in organizations that I've worked with how we use this tool so that you don't have a separate way to manage risk in your EMS when you're looking at already managing risk in your QMS. So we're going to take a little bit of a look inside of PFMEA. Now, full disclosure on PFMEA. Because it is easier to understand, I decided to do a fourth edition PFMEA. For those of you that don't know what a fourth edition PFMEA is, the good news is you don't know the other types, right? So it's going to be very clean. But for those of you that are like, well, what about AIAG VDA method? Every method of potential process failure modes and effects analysis can be handled by these fundamentals. So if you understand the fundamentals, the individual modalities and the individual methods are just detail. After that, I'm going to stretch a little bit and I'm going to introduce you to PFMEA into business processes. This is an area that most people don't go, but I'm going to show you how to become more preventative in environmental risk through backing it into your business process instead of merely controlling it and reporting it at the operations level. From there, we're going to do about probably 15 minutes of Q&A. I'm a big fan of not teaching for time. So we're going to teach you through the slides. We're going to answer some questions. And if we get done at 10:45 today or 11:45, wherever it is, I'll give you 15 minutes of your life back. All right. So let's go ahead and get started here. The first thing that I want to do is I want to go ahead and I want to deploy our first poll. Now, here's the way it works with polls. I have a prepared slide deck, but I don't know all of who's going to show up in the room when we do these. So the reason why we do this poll is I have to know a little bit about you out there in webinar land in order to give you the best experience. So what we're going to do here, I'm going to go ahead and launch this first poll. And we're going to come over here. And let's go ahead and launch this. Now, the fun stops when I get to be about 70%, right? I can see a little thing here saying 70% of people answered. So once we get to about 70%, I'll stop the poll and I'll share the results with you, right? Because I think you guys should probably see this. And the reason is you need to know who's in the room with you. And the reason why I do this again, it allows me to know who I'm talking to so that I don't go too far in a topic, but I also don't go too shallow in a topic. All right. Working through it. I got about, say, 50, 60% participating. We're almost there, folks. Fun stops when we hit 70. All right. Starting to slow down. Looking good. All right. Why don't we go ahead and kill it there? I'm going to go ahead and end a poll, and I'm going to share the results. So you should see there, most of you, I'll say 50%, right about half, a little over half, are very familiar with FMEA as a methodology. This is good. I do have a couple people that are not familiar with FMEA. That's fine. We'll cover a little bit of fundamentals. And everybody has at least somewhat familiarity. So I think that we'll be in good shape there. This helps me figure out how deep to go. And we're roughly 50-50 on people that have integrated systems, right? Maybe 60-40 if you want to round up. This is an important thing because one of the things that I like to say, prior to 2015, I did my first integrated system right around 2008. And it took the better part of about 10 years for organizations to catch up to the idea that there was some similarity and some economy that could be achieved through an integrated system. So if you have one of those, the content in this webinar should be an easy transition. If you don't have an integrated system, you're going to want to tie in with the QMS and figure out how to get that sidecar in for the EMS attached to the quality side. And a majority of you, 55% of you, actually audit the system. So this is awesome. I got a lot of EMS auditors. I have about 20% architects. So the good news is what you're going to see here today, you can take back and you can draft into the infrastructure of your system. We've got some leaders in here that are generally responsible for it. And we're going to cover, because we have so many auditors, I'd like to kind of go through maybe how to audit this. So I think that we'll add a little bit to the presentation based on this so that the poll results you guys just gave me kind of pay off. So the entire presentation today revolves really around three different aspects, right? And I'm going to say three different definitions. When you try to manage your environmental system, you create aspects, right, based on your business. Every business has unique things that impact the environment, and it really depends on the business you're in, the size of your business, a lot of different things. So we're going to be talking a lot about environmental aspects, those things which eventually have an environmental impact. So it's aspects and impacts, right? The way I like to represent this, cause and effect, right? Your aspect is something that happens, and this is what happens as a result of this thing. So if we understand that, we'll be applying these terms to the PFMEA. Now, I'm going to go into quality world for just a second for my integrated people here and the people that know PFMEA. When you do PFMEA, every cause of failure in a quality side is the result of a work element. Now, I'll use the term work element. That's an AIGVDA term. But if you're familiar with fourth edition, you might be familiar with a tool called a fishbone diagram. So in quality, every cause of an FMEA failure generally comes from an element on the fishbone. These are similar to your environmental aspects. And then in FMEA, there's always going to be some form of an impact, right? There's going to be a failure effect. So when we do this part, if we understand that these terms apply in the EMS, but similar terms apply in the QMS, we can start to draw some sort of similarity. And then what I kind of wanted to say here is I want to really focus on the prevention of pollution, right? So when we talk about PFMEA, one of the elements when we look at PFMEA is after you do a risk assessment, you'll take in some actions, right? If the risk is too high. So the same thing that the standard is going to ask for in the EMS, oh, is the same thing that the standard is going to ask for in the QMS. Let's go ahead and turn this on here. Let's go ahead and make sure this disappears. All right. So it's a very simple process, right? The first step in implementing your environmental controls inside of the PFMEA is to figure out what your potential aspects are going to be. So if you're new to EMS world, right? These are the things that your business spins off, deals with. It's part of how you do business. So examples of this could be waste oils, right? One of the ones we don't think a lot about, but it's quickly becoming a problem for us here, especially around the holidays, is cardboard. One of the things that I was reading the other day is it's typically right after the holidays with all of the shipping going on, that the mountains and mountains, what they were calling the landslide of cardboard, begins to hit some of these areas where they either recycle it, and a lot of it ends up inside of landfills. It's becoming a very big problem as we can order a lot through Amazon right now and have it shipped at the door. Other things that could be potential aspects are emissions. And then depending on what you do, they can even be chemicals. One of the most unique businesses that I ever saw was a windshield manufacturer. And this is one of the reasons why I put this down here. When they have windshields that didn't make the cut, right? They were going through to get a crack, to get a quality defect, and they had to be scrapped. They would put it on a large conveyor. The conveyor would then go out the door and it would vent to the outside. There was a concrete slab in which the windshield would then fall off the conveyor, maybe 20, 30 feet in the air, and shatter all over the concrete. This led to broken glass all over this concrete pad, which was eventually going to migrate from that concrete pad into the environment nearby, into the grass, into the wildlife, into the park. So it really is dependent on your business, which aspects you choose. And you have to be aware then that those aspects are going to have impact. Now, once you identify your aspects, because this is EMS 101, right? You have to do some determination. Which processes? Now, when I talk processes, I want to talk right now about manufacturing processes. Which processes you consider applicable that are impacting these aspects? So you list the aspect here. You then determine which processes might create it, generate it, or influence it. And then you use some criteria to determine what's significant. Now let's pause here and let's take a look at this. There is an equivalency between a QMS and an EMS. In the QMS, quality management system, we talk about special characteristics, right? We talk about form, fit, function. We talk about safety critical. We talk about regulatory, all of that. In environmental, it's really about significance, right? Now, the question you may have is what makes it significant? That's a story for another time, right? It really depends. They give you some criteria that you could consider. But the important thing is if you're going to implement this, you have to determine which aspects are applicable. You have to tie them back to manufacturing processes. And then you have to decide for your program which ones you consider significant. Now, in this example, for a fictitious windshield company, right? Clearview Auto Glass, we went through and we said, okay, these are three aspects that their environmental system has chosen to focus on: cardboard, which they use during the packaging process; scrap glass, which is created just through the art of manufacturing, right? Whether it breaks on the floor, whether it breaks during handling, whether it's cut wrong. And then all of the pulleys, all of the furnaces, all of the belts that go through and handle this glass, there's a tremendous amount of machining oil generated, right? Utilized. So we just picked three, and we got cardboard, scrap glass, and used machining oil. Very simple. The two that they thought were significant were here. And so we identified the processes in which they occurred. So this is step two, right? Once you know what your aspects are, tie them to the processes. Now, let's go to the next step here. I want to give you a couple tools. If you've been in the quality world for a while, these tools are kind of like you came up with them, right? You grew up with them. They're part of quality, in terms of fundamentals. But environmental, you may not. So the two tools that I would recommend that you use to do this, if you are looking at a process, there is a tool called a fishbone. So if your process is here, you have machines, materials, environment, you've got manual components, you could add method, you could add a whole bunch of stuff. But for me, when I go into a process step, I look at the process step and I look at the things that the machine might have environmental impact on. What is the machine spitting out? What is going on with the machine? You could look at the indirect material. And then you could also look, if your setup worker is the one that may be performing maintenance, you may grab certain elements that you would consider to be significant in terms of causes. This type of fishbone analysis allows you to think through the station in isolation and go, what is it at this station that is going to produce this aspect that is going to impact my objective and cause variation in whether or not I hit it? The other thing that you can do, there is a technique that was popularized in Six Sigma called Y equals F of X. It's very similar to the fishbone. And the reason why I put it up here, in Y equals F of X, Y is a product requirement, and it is always a function of X. So let me give you the environmental version of this. We know that we might be measuring cardboard. We know here that in a packaging operation, this is a material present in the packaging operation. But what happens if cardboard is also present at 3 or 4 incoming steps? These small areas will start to combine to create a very significant type of aspect. So the first thing you do is you identify the thing, and then you start looking at what are the potential aspects present in each station. And the reason why this works is when you think about this, you can't control the output. but you can control the input. So if you get to the end of the year, you're looking at machining oil and your quantities are far and away greater than your targets. All you're doing by measuring at the end of the year is really looking in the rearview mirror. So to do this, you start off with your stations and you figure out where these aspects are utilized and what is either generating them or influencing them. Now, the secret to this now we know what the aspects are. Now we know which stations are influencing them. Now, the trick to this, and this is coming back to the fundamentals of all failure modes and effects analysis. The heart of all failure modes and effects analysis is functionality. What is the station supposed to do? Now, let me break this down for you. When you are in the quality system, typically the PFMEA only covers quality aspects. This is completely wrong, right? So, as an example, in Op 10, we cut the windshield to shape, right? The windshield goes onto a table. An automated grinder starts grinding away, right? It's got a cooling agent with it. When we use the PFMEA, we pull things like dimensions, other things on the print, CSR requirements. But here's what I want you to think for all of my EMS people in the room. If we're going to run one set of books, an integrated system, what are the functions that they play? Okay, let me give you an example because most of you don't think about this. When you look at the functionality for this station, not only does it need to cut the glass to the rough shape, but we need to moderate the amount of waste oil generated. Add your environmental functions onto your stations. This is a fundamental mind shift. Let's say that this machine goes through a tremendous amount of waste oil. And the reason why I use this term very succinctly, a function is a verb noun. Now, stay with me here. Can this station minimize the amount of waste oil? Probably not, right? Certain amount has to go in, certain amount has to come out, right? That's the manufacturer's guideline. But can we adjust and moderate that amount with the intention of staying within our limits set through the EMS targets? Absolutely, we can. So when you think about the stations now that have these aspects attached to them, the secret to this part of it is getting the functions to the EMS placed inside of this PFMEA. And remember, functionality 101. The function is always verb noun, and the requirement is always the measurable output of how we did it. So, whatever your function is, if your function isn't measurable, you're not there. This is especially challenging in emerging areas like carbon. Right now, if you looked how we measure carbon, companies that have engaged in carbon footprint monitoring, it's very all over the place. But can I absolutely count in gallons the amount of waste oil that comes off from that machine in a given month, in a given quarter, in a given year? Absolutely, I can. So let's just do this real quick. Step one, identify the aspect. Step two, determine the processes in which it exists. Step three, adjust the function. When you do the PFMEA, what you want to do, and I'm going to show you this in a second, you want to put the functionality down. You see here in red. Now, again, this is a typical fourth edition, but it works in any version of FMEA. And notice how this is complementary. If I have station 40 from a pure quality side, It's supposed to cut the glass to shape, and the requirement is the profile. I can absolutely measure profile of that glass. The failure mode is incorrect profile, potential effect, severity. It's a special characteristic, and we do it because we chose the wrong program. So, this is typical quality 101. And I know here, fourth edition is phasing out and all this. I guess what? Action priority is the same thing as RPN, just a different way to cut it. So, here, let's look at the environmental side. I still have station 40, and I've asked it to moderate the waste oil to a defined amount. Now, this is interesting. In quality, now I'm going to talk quality for just a second. You don't routinely put specifications on FMEAs, right? Specifications are generally the realm of the control plan. If we follow the same principle to moderate waste oil, and I'm just looking at the amount, whether it's 400 gallons, 4,000 gallons, or 4 gallons, could you put this also into the control plan? Absolutely. If you follow this process, the next logical area is if this is the risk profile that's created, the control plan forms the operational definition of how often and how much and how we know whether or not we got there. So this is no different than what we do in quality. Because if we have an amount, guess what's going to jack up your environmental program? Over amount. And depending on the aspect, we could be in the regulatory world, and that's a bad day. You can still put significance inside a class. Now, here's the thought process, and this is where we have to look at causes. If I'm looking at my program and Operation 40 is supposed to moderate the waste oil, we're going to budget for a certain amount that comes off, right? We've already talked about that. But what happens if we decide to increase the preventative maintenance? That will be a problem, right? Imagine you're changing it once every month. Now you go through and you change it once every 2 weeks. What do you think is going to happen to that amount? You're going to go over. So, in order to do this, now stay with me. When you set the budget for amount, if increased maintenance is a cause, you create the preventative maintenance schedule to be lockstep with the amount you're trying to hit. If you're trying to stay under 400 gallons on this machine, at that point, if I look at the year and that preventative maintenance schedule has me spinning off 800, I'm going to be in trouble. So, how do we know whether or not we're working with this? Quarterly monitoring. If you're looking at aspects and impacts, you're looking at programs, you're looking at objectives. If you're only looking at your environmental performance at the end of the year, you're in trouble anyway. So I'm going to quarterly monitor the amount of waste oil to determine whether or not this is actually preventing me from increasing my maintenance to an area where the amount goes sideways. That's it. Now, the other thing you have to do, right? Does Section 6 of the standard require you to take actions for risk? Does it require you to measure risk? The same way we do it in quality. There's severity, occurrence, and detection. Quarterly monitoring is a pretty poor detection, right? Because it's already happened. And based on this, if I know that I am frequently flip-flopping my maintenance, I know here that at the end of the day, my risk profile is going to be pretty high. And the reason why this is important, imagine you have 10 of these cutting operations. Each one, the maintenance is very particular and can increase frequently. What do you think is going to happen to your macro program when this happens? You're going to get to the end of the year. You're going to get to that management review. You're going to pull that data and you're going to be disappointed. So, in a manufacturing operation, this is how you start moving it into the PFMEA and subsequently into the control plan because that's where you'll specify the amount. That's where you'll specify the preventative maintenance interval. Now, I know there's some people out there that don't have a lot of FMEA experience, and some of you out there are interested in how you audit it. Let's say here that we're looking at this and your group goes through and you see this on a PFMEA that you're auditing. What you're going to have to do, your organization can create their own set of tables for environmental. So maybe a 9 in environmental is not the same as a 9 in quality, right? Or an occurrence of 7 is not the same as an occurrence of 3. But let me show you the similarity because I don't think it's far off or as far off as you normally think it is. What I have here, I've done some fourth edition tables and I have done some AIG VDA. If we look at an excerpt from the severity table from fourth edition, a 10 affects the safe operation of a vehicle, so it's safety, right? A 9 is non-compliance with regulations. When it comes to environmental management, do you have a lot of environmental regulations? Absolutely. Is there a lot more safety in environmental, right? Because you're dealing with chemicals, you're dealing with human exposure. So even here, I think there's similarities between, hey, if it's going to represent the health and safety issue of either our workers, our environment, or our community, we're at a 10. If it's going to put us in non-compliance with regulations, it's clearly a 9. Let's look at the occurrence table. Now, this is out of the AIAG VDA method. And again, I wanted to show this to you because we're not really that far off. Look at a 10 in occurrence, which is pretty bad, right? That's the worst it gets. You have no prevention controls, right? None, nothing. But notice in these high values, you're relying on behavioral controls. Now, let's define behavioral for a second. This is counting on somebody to do the right thing. This is counting on, let's say that they're emptying that waste oil. You're counting on them not to go to the storm drain and pour it down there. Can we all largely agree that technical controls are better than behavioral? I think we can generally agree that having a technical control is better than a behavioral. Now, technical controls may not always be available. They're definitely more costly. And so here, can we largely agree that best practices are probably a lower occurrence? Sure, even in environmental. Because if you look at your prevention control, are there those that are highly effective, are effective, are somewhat effective, or are there those that will have little effect in preventing some things? I'll give you an example, real life example. When you go to a recycling facility there in a lunchroom and you have bins for composting, for cardboard, for recyclables, for waste, all of that kind of stuff, how successful is the human creature putting stuff in the right bin? Even if you color code it with the intention of preventing, that's real, real weak. So here, the reason why I showed this to you, sometimes we think environmental and quality are miles apart, but in reality, the same tables with a little bit of ingenuity and placing them in the same operational area will yield very positive results. Now, let's talk a little bit about sustainability. Let's say that you get your manufacturing operations right. You got all your operations, you got all their aspects, you've got them in the PFMEA, you're managing projects. This is good. But the problem is the reason why I call this sustainability, the program and the aspect and the impact has already hit your floor. How do we start moving it up the chain outside of just getting to the manufacturing operation? And how do we get the business system thinking about it? Now, notice here, this is where I bring in a little bit of the ISO. 614 planning action asks you to integrate and implement actions into the processes and or other business processes. Okay, your business processes are the single biggest offenders when it comes to your environmental system. Because, let me give you some examples. Purchasing. How many times has a purchasing agent had a chemical, had a commodity, had a component, and actively went searching for a cheaper solution and brought in an inferior product which created an aspect that previously didn't exist or increased the impact or increased the significance for your system? I know it's happened to me a lot. Sales. Sales is notorious for bringing on jobs that create aspects, right? Oh, how bad can it be? We're just going to start making smart parts, right? What's electronic waste? Oh boy, right? When you start becoming an electronic waste facility, that's a little bit of it's a whole different change if you're not used to it. Change management, another business process, right? We're just going to go through and we're just going to up the preventative maintenance, by twofold. And lastly, the design. Well, this material is hard to work with, so let's bring in this other material that contains some hexavalent chromium or something like that. That's going to be a bad day. These will all influence those processes that you mapped in your PFMEA. So here's what I would offer you. I'm going to give you the application of this as well as the method. We typically think of FMEA as simply being for manufacturing processes, but what if you could use it to predict our business processes like purchasing, training, design? So let me give you an example. I'll give you a non EMS example. I'll give you a non QMS example. Run the marketing process here at Plexus. When it comes to marketing, do I have to hit the right customer at the right time, in the right way, with the right product, right? Four pieces of marketing. Are there failures inherent in every part of that process? Can I get the right customer at the wrong time? Absolutely. Can I get the right product but at the wrong time? Absolutely. Can I do a PFMEA on the marketing process to anticipate my high risk areas and put in preventions and detections in order to increase my chances of reliability? Absolutely. So, the same way you think about your operational processes, your cuttings, your bendings, your weldings, you can think about it in terms of your purchasing and your sales and your design process. And if you're an ISO 9001 company or an ISO 14001 company, I should say, you already have your processes mapped. Do a PFMEA on them. Now I'm going to show you how. When we do consultation with companies, we recommend they use what's called the 5 cubed method. You start by identify at maximum 5 steps of the process. What we're going to do is I'm just going to give you 2 because we didn't need 5. I chose vendor survey and vendor reward, right? And you might be asking yourself, well, why 5? I'll bet you if you go to your process, there are 5 things that you probably think are more important than others. The reason we do 5 is because it would be nice to do 35, but sometimes you'll never make it. So we identify 5 steps and it forces you to really think in terms of significance. Then we identify at max 5 functions. So, as an example, when it comes to vendor survey, one of the functions is to assure the vendor has an existing EMS program. Because if we're looking at vendors, do we want people that have an existing EMS program? Maybe we do. I'm not saying it's required. I'm saying that maybe that's something we want for ourselves. And when we look at vendor reward, the function of vendor reward, one of the functions might be to negotiate the return of waste materials, which means I don't want to hold your stuff. If you send me stuff and I have to scrap it, I want to return it to you to go through and dispose of. And then what are in max 5 requirements of each function? How do we measure if they have an existing EMS? There's a current cert. That's a very simple requirement. How do I know if we negotiated return? In the contract, there's a vendor responsibility. Maybe we're in the area where we want the vendors to take care of their own potential scrap. So from here, now let's kind of look at this part. Let's go down the road. What's the failure mode? No cert. What's the impact? We're going to have to additionally monitor them, or In the case of they're not taking over their own scrap, we have an additional disposal stream now that we have to manage. This could be significant. What has to happen? The contract doesn't capture the point. Happens all the time. We don't have a prevention for it. And so the only way we can even tell that it ever happened was after APQP has been closed out. Folks, one thing that I teach in FMEA that I think that applies absolutely to EMS, 7, 10, and 6. That's a risk profile. 5, 5, and 6 is a risk profile. Literally, we are telling you exactly where they're going to fail you. Now, the step toward true prevention. If we can move through the operational areas, which is where the waste streams, where the aspects, and where the impact is housed, we go upstream to the business processes with the intention of never, ever, ever allowing them to those operations. The gold standard, and this is one of the reasons why we wanted to kind of title the webinar Think Like a Quality Engineer, is the next step is an APQP. So let's say that in sales, right? We go through and we sell something and it's going to create a completely new waste stream for us. It's going to create a completely new aspect. We want to manage that here before program approval. If we're talking, we just talked about purchasing, right? Replacing one product with another, that's change management, right? But if we can come over here and say, hey, this particular program or this particular part requires us to buy from somewhere that maybe uses materials that aren't on our approved list, it's too late at that point if we're already in purchasing, if we're already over here post launch. What you want to do is move this material back as part of APQP. So when they do product design, you can't use this material. When you do process design, you can't use this solvent. This is real, true, pure prevention. And so the further back you go, the more preventative you become. And it really does start over here with identifying what processes you have, tying them back to aspects, doing your Y equals F of X analysis, adding functionality into your PFMEA, and starting here. But it continues on with building the PFMEAs for key things that happen over here. And it finishes with adoption into APQP to think it through before it even has a chance to hit your floor. All right. Maddie, you want to go ahead and open up for questions, Q&A?
Absolutely. So everybody should be able to, oh, if I could figure my camera out here. Everybody should be able to see at the bottom of the screen that there's a Q&A feature. While that is running, I don't know, Jeremy, would you like to launch just our follow-up poll here?
Absolutely. Why don't we go ahead and do that? Let's check back and see if anybody learned anything today. Because as much as I like you guys, I want you to learn something. All right. Given what you saw today, how easy do you think this change could be? Now, some of you I know don't have experience with FMEA, so you're probably seeing a wide uphill. And then there's a lot more content I can draw parallels to between the EMS and the QMS. Competency is another one for me that I think is one of those areas where we do a poor job. I'd love to do some more on the EMS. So if you want to see the kind of quality EMS blur, especially for integrated systems, let me know. We want to build stuff you guys want to see. I don't want to stand up here and talk to myself for myself. All right, we're almost there, about 70%. All right, and now I'll share the results here. This is an interesting one. I don't know if you guys can see this at home here. Maddie, can you see it where you are?
Sure can.
All right. Only 8% of people said that this was going to be pretty complicated. And what I might think there is that it may be complicated because you may have to build the PFMEA culture as well. I'm really excited, let's say, in terms of seeing a lot of people say, you know what, this is somewhat complicated, but you know what I hear when I see that? But it's doable, right? And then a couple are probably like, oh, we can do this pretty easy already. And you're probably the ones running integrated systems. So, and then more content shared methodologies. I think it's an overwhelming yes. So I'm good with that. I think that we can probably put a couple more in this year. Maybe one do one a quarter on EMS, QMS, integrated stuff. So this gives us what I need. All right. Patty, while they're filling out the Q&A there, you want to do your spiel there and I'll move to the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. So just some wrap up notes while everybody's getting their questions to us. For attendees of this webinar, we are offering a 15% discount code on our new EMS combined course. So this is an ISO 9001 2015 understanding and an internal quality auditing with ISO 14001 2015. And this is going to be brand new to us for this upcoming year. It's a 4-day auditor course. So the discount code that you'll be receiving in an email following up will be for the session running January 26th through January 29th, and that is a live virtual course. Jeremy, you got anything you want to add about that?
All right. I'm a real practical type of person. So the only thing I got to add, 2 certs for the same 4 days you'd spend doing an EMS course. That's really the benefit, right? So if you're running an integrated system or you want dual certs, I'll tell you, I took a 4-day internal auditor course when I was doing my 14,001 and all I got was one cert. So 2 for 1, I'd say. That's all I got. Simple.
Great. All right, we
All right.
do have a couple questions rolling in here. Um, First one we've got here is what will be the relationship between ISO 14001 and ISO/DIS 53001 standards?
Ooh, I'm gonna have to give me 1 second. Let's see, what do we got here? You mentioned the DIS, so I might not be able to answer that one
Okay.
live here. Oh, sustainability. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put a pin in that one. Now, let me see. We know who asked that. So what I'll do is we'll do an FAQ. Let me go back to some of the people that are sitting on some of those committees that are writing these. I will ask that question. I got people behind me that I can't ask. I can't answer that one about the 53,001. 9,001 DIS? Sure. 14,001? Absolutely. 53,001? That's one's shaky. So, but I will have an answer. I'm going to parking lot that one. You'll hear back from us in a couple days. It's my Christmas gift to you.
Well, thank you for that question. We also have, let's see. I know you discussed at the top of this using FMEA versus the fourth edition versus AIAG. One of the questions is why use the tables of FMEA from AIAG VDA instead of the ones from the fourth edition?
Ah, okay. I only did it in my example to show that there was not a methodological difference between fourth and AIAG VDA. If you're strictly AIG VDA, use those tables, right? Because again, it's the same thing. Tens are safety, nines are regulatory, very simple. So the other thing is if you're an AIAG VDA person, over on the left-hand side of the table, you remember where they allow you to write in your own examples for those? I personally have coached EMS organizations where I've had them write in the EMS aspects just on the side of the table. Hey, a 6 means this, a 7 means this. So I did it just for illustrative purposes to show there was no dichotomy. But whatever method you're using, you can make it fit. And the reason why I did that, so many people get held up on analysis paralysis because they think they have to make it fit and it's so super hard. Intention, right? It's, hey, if it's a regulatory, probably needs to be higher up the chain, right? Then, hey, this is just going to be a problem. Yep. Good question.
Great. Then we've got, is there any way to find out the impact of ISO 14001 on APQP?
Okay, impact of 14,001 on APQP. Let's put it this way. When we take a look at the impact on APQP, ISO 14001 deals largely with regulatory requirements. There could be some customer requirements as well. Some of your OEMs require you to have a valid EMS cert. So part of your APQP could be jeopardized by your EMS not measuring up. My concern would be more so in the life cycle perspective. When you're doing APQP, there's a big push right now on life cycle perspective, not just when we make the vehicle, but when we drive the vehicle and when it goes into decommissioning. So, what I would do there is I would look at the entire life cycle because your EMS part of that is going to be, hey, if I use this chemical and I make this thing, when I go to dispose of it, I'm going to have to consider my aspect and my potential impact through the entire life cycle of the product. So when you look at APQP, I would definitely bring it back to your customer specifics and your regulatory. And then you'll figure out, hey, if we don't do this part right in our EMS, this is the potentiality, not just for today, but 10, 12 years down the road. And as somebody that has been involved in having to unearth parts that probably shouldn't have been put in the ground necessarily that were disposed of improperly, that was millions of dollars that we ended up shaking out, during that excavation. Yep.
Great. Well, it looks like we might be able to give these folks some time back here. Looks
Perfect.
like you did a pretty good job there if we don't have a ton of questions today, so that's awesome.
All right. Remember, guys, when it comes to EMS, you're unique but not different. Risk management is risk management, right? And the same tools we have today, we can use later.
All right, well,
All right.
perfect. And again, everybody, I will send out that email as a follow-up with that discount code and some other information, as well as a link to the webinar. So just thank you again, everybody, for attending, and we will see you all in the next one.